Hello. So today I'm doing a video about the NEA and some structure advice for it. Sorry if this recording seems very disjointed. There is some issues with my laptop and I can't record it normally like I used to. So, in terms of the structure of the NEA, so what you need is the introduction, you need your literature review, methodology, results of fieldwork, your analysis, conclusion, evaluation, and your bibliography. And all the extra things that you need to mention are on that screen. But I'm going to go through each thing, so don't worry about it. Okay, so first thing I want to mention before we go into anything. So my question was something along the lines of, to what extent is the River Avon more susceptible or vulnerable to flooding? I think it was vulnerable, something like that. So mine is a physical geography focused kind of question. So if you're doing human geography, you can use this structure, but all the kind of examples I use, they may not be as relevant for you, but you can use these things to help you. Okay, so in terms of first thing you need to do is have a table of contents at the front of the paper. If you're doing it on Word, then you can do this by going on References and then pressing Table of Contents and inserting one. It's very useful because you don't have to write it out, it does it all automatically, and you can press to update Table of Contents to have it as accurate as possible. So, first thing is just having a small kind of general introduction where you talk about the area you're going to be analysing, and something you also need to mention is the reason as to why you're researching this. Why is what you're researching relevant? So, for example, I found that there is an increased flood risk in the Avon Warwickshire catchment, and that is why I'm going to be researching it. Second thing you need to put in is your hypothesis. So you need to put at least 3 different questions or aspects that you will be researching in your paper, using sentence starters such as to what extent or how far. The front of the question will make it easier to debate it in your conclusion. So the third thing is some specification links. I will put the specification in the description, but what you can do is go into the AQA A Level Geography specification, and then what I did to make this very useful and easy for myself, I just pressed Control F and just search for a word such as flood or river, and then I just, whatever had those words in it and is relevant to what I'm researching, just copied and pasted it with the little number at the beginning and everything. And then I said what exactly this means for my research and how it relates to it. So an additional thing I did in my introduction that you do need to do in terms of the Google Earth thing I'll talk about in a minute, or just OS maps, whatever. You have to do that, but something I specifically did as well is adding some location specifics, saying why I chose 3 locations, because I chose 3 locations to do, why I chose to do 3, why I chose the area, what kind of sampling technique I used. So in terms of OS maps and Google Maps and things, I used Google Earth to help me. So what I did is I used the add path or polygon button there, and I mapped out the river, which is in blue, a rough sketch of the water body, which is in green. I also pinpointed the 3 locations on there to the exact latitude and longitude, which I found very useful. You can also get Google Earth on your phone, so when you're out finding these places, do your research, then you can put your exact location as to like where you're going to do your research, and I found that very useful. It makes it very accurate. So in terms of literature review, you need to include the title of the paper, a summary of the paper, what parts you found most useful, any useful graphs, and then I would also comment on the usefulness of the paper and what exact information will contribute to your final argument. I put like a little thing I wrote from my own, which you can use as a sort of, you can just look at it, see what I mean by commenting on the usefulness. So where did I find my papers? I used something called EBSCOhost, which is similar to Google Scholar, but it's available only with a university email. So if you have anyone who is going to university or has gone to university and they have their email, you can most likely access EBSCO, and I found it very useful because it skips the paywall sometimes for some papers, which Google Scholar doesn't do. But you can use Google Scholar and you can use the internet and books as well. So what I would do is aim to have at least 10 sources. I personally had 13. Some of them that were longer and some that were a bit shorter. And also in your literature review, you can talk about models that you found, or you can talk about your research methodology, such as types of sampling, or you can put in something that I had in my mind. Oh yeah, like how to do, for example, an infiltration test or something like that. So in terms of your methodology, I'd recommend you do a methodology table. Makes it very clear that you've answered each point. So the first thing you need to mention is the types of fieldwork that you'll conduct. For example, if you're doing the river steepness, the soil infiltration, or an EQS, which is a environmental quality survey. I think best would be to have at least 5. I personally wrote 7 of them. And in the table, you should include the equipment you'll use, reasons for why you're assessing these aspects using like the literature that you've researched, quoting that. You should mention the graphing and data collection methods which you'll use, such as graph type, how you'll plot it, in reference to where you got the graphing idea from. You should also mention the reasons for the sampling method that you've chosen, and this is where you'd like quote research which suggests why the sampling method is best for your fieldwork research, and you should do that for every single different type of fieldwork. The second thing you need to have in your methodology is your risk assessment, where you mention what the hazard is, what the risk is related to the hazard, and what control measure you can put in place to avoid this risk. And you can do that in a table as well. Third thing you need to mention is your day description, commenting on any aspect that you need that is relevant to your research, such as temperature or weather conditions, such as if it's windy or rainy, the time and date of when you conducted the research, and the rain. For example, if this is useful for you, like the rainfall in the past week, temperature in the past week, to give an overview of conditions. In terms of the fieldwork data, something additionally that I did was speaking about the relation between the River Avon and how close the residential buildings are to the river, and I used the long-term flood risk from flood risk service from gov.uk, which shows the flood risk in the area, which I found very useful as well to put in. So, but in your fieldwork data, you essentially need to put in your equipment list, listing every piece of equipment that you had and used, and put your results that you got in a table similar to one that you'll take with you, or the same one that you'll take with you, hopefully. So an example of my table for slope readings on the left there. what I do as well is put a little summary of the data collected, any issues you came across, and how successful you were in conducting your research. For example, for that specific day and location. Like I did for location one, I spoke about issues I had in day one and successes I had in day two, for example. So in your analysis, this is going to be more sort of personal for you and how you want to do it. But essentially, you need to analyze any graphs you drew and what they show, what they mean for your research. Do they compare to anything you've researched in your lit review? Do they disagree or agree with your findings? Think about why you got specific results. I would also analyze each location, if you did locations, and its significance in proving or answering your point, e.g. if the river Avon is more vulnerable to flooding, in my example. In the analysis as well, I put in my statistical tests, which I did outliers and standard deviation, which I found very useful. There's other ones as well, like Mann-Whitney U-test, and there's some other ones you can find as well, which you can use. I couldn't really use those, unfortunately. But standard deviation is very useful if you understand the definition of it, and finding outliers is also useful. And try to cover and use all the papers you've mentioned in your literature review here because you need to show that they were actually relevant. So in your conclusion, you should answer your 3 hypothesis questions or how many you had, using all that you've researched and written about, mentioning nothing new. You shouldn't put anything new, which is a bit of an issue with mine because I did put in some new information, which is a bit bad on my part, but you're not meant to. You're just meant to take everything you've analysed and just put it in to your conclusion. So use all the aspects for and against to create a holistic answer to your question. Something you also need to put in your conclusion is the ethical considerations and how you avoided damage to the environment. How did you avoid being a nuisance for the public, so just being in the way? And did you have any consent to carry out your investigation? So in your evaluation, you should try and make both aspects of what went well and even better if as equal as possible. I'm more of a even better if person, but you have to say some good things about it as well. So some things you can mention is if the NEA went well, what can you comment on as a success? What did you do well? Did you argue your point well? Did you conduct your research well? Did you write a good analysis? And an even better if, for example, you can mention if there were things you did not do up to standard, such as types of equipment that you used. Like, for example, for me, because I did mine in the summer between year 12 and year 13. So I took a lot of equipment from school, but I forgot to bring a quad wrap. So I had to make my own with hot glue and skewers, and it was awful. It broke down very quickly, and it was not good. It was not good. So I put that in. Also, another thing as well, which will make this very, very useful, is if you put. Oh, I lost my train of thought. Someone just came to the house. Oh yeah, if you take pictures of everything that you've done or you used, it's good proof as well. If you're, for example, you're doing random sampling, you can show the randomizer, or like with the equipment, like I made a picture of my quadrat and me pointing at it, showing that I'm using it. So that could be useful. Taking also pictures of the, for example, place overall as well proves that you've actually gone there. That is very useful. Pictures, pictures, pictures. Okay, so like another thing that you may have not done up to standard is if you've not followed your risk assessment, which for this I would say try not to reveal too much. If it's something that happened that was really drastic, just ask yourself, like, do they really need to know this specific thing? You can mention stuff that's productive and whatever, but if it's something that's like, yeah, no, let's not mention that, they will never know. Okay, so you also could comment on if you got good results or not, which is I spent most of mine doing because my results for my infiltration test were awful, awful. So I mentioned why, you know. Okay, so another thing you could put in your even better if is if you didn't draw enough graphs maybe or didn't do enough statistical tests. And the main part of even better if is trying to be constructive with it and saying like, next time if I did this again, I would have done this or I would have done this. And if it's something that you can do now, for example, do not draw enough graphs, then draw more graphs now. Like that kind of thing, you could do yourself. But if it's something like my research didn't go and my equipment wasn't good enough, that you can put in. But like again, with like example equipment, like don't put, oh, I think that my clintometer was not calibrated correctly and you didn't look at the see how wrong it was, what is it called? The zero error. If you didn't account for the zero error, don't really say that, oh, well, I think my clintometer was broken or something like that. That is a fault on your part. Mm, okay. So in terms of bibliography, I've put some examples here of what I've done in the structure of how it should look like using Harvard reference. So I put the name or the surname and then the names, all separated by commas per every single person. In brackets, you put the year the paper was published, and then you put the name of it. Then you can put the town or city or country sometimes of where the paper came from and the name of the company. I put the page number there because it was there, so why not? And I put where it's available. You can do that with a link, or you can just do it with like well, sometimes you can't really put access that. Like, for example, for the last one, I quoted a book. Can't really access it anyway, it's just a book. So there you go, and that's all. I really hope that's helped you. Good luck NEAing, that's the word.